while all these people were telling me how wonderful I was, inside I was hurting. And I didn't know how to express it. I didn't know how to process it. And so I got in my head, like, I'm not wonderful. I'm horrible. And if you don't believe it, watch what I do to this kid on the school bus. Watch what I do to this teacher's classroom. Watch what I do to the society. By the time I was 16, I was a full-blown alcoholic. I had been violent since I was a little kid. I literally have an addiction to antisocial behavior, and I can never get enough of it. I can never shock people enough. I can never repulse people enough. And that's when I was introduced to white nationalism through white power skinhead music. Me and my buddies put a white power band together, and that band was like a magnet for every pissed off white kid in Wisconsin. The way he put it, he said we were like feral kids that no one had any control of, and we were the ones calling the shots. So like I very much became that authority myself. The more noise we made, all these old school neo-Nazis started crawling out from under their rocks. Okay, yeah, you guys are great. Do what you're doing. You take the lead. You run with this. But here, read this. That really kind of gave our drunken hooliganism an ideology to drive it. When we're inputting hate and violence into the world, the output that the world gives us is hate and violence, which, as you can imagine, creates a vicious cycle that just sends your life spiraling further and further downward.
Yeah.
And that's what happened for 7 years.
Mine is the only voice.
Wow.
What have I been doing?
Lay down my autonomy.
After that, it got very dark very quickly.
Hey, my name is Shalise Ansola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. If you're only listening on those podcast apps and you prefer to see our faces, head on over to YouTube at Cults to Consciousness. It's so awesome when you guys can interact with a post. It truly is the best way to support the podcast, and it's free to hit the like button, subscribe, become an advocate. We are just so excited that we have so many people willing to come on and support our guests who are bravely telling their stories. So also leaving those words of encouragement for them means so much because they are real people, and it's just so awesome that they're willing to share with us. So today's guest, he was recommended by Batya, who I've mentioned before. She sends us incredible suggestions, so thank you, Batya, for this. He was also a white supremacist, so we've talked about this before. So we're going to get into what it was like being a white supremacist, neo-Nazi, and thanks so much for joining us, Arno Michaelis.
It's my pleasure, Shalise. Thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. So you wrote a book, My Life After Hate. If you have it, I would love for you to hold it up for everybody to see. Can you talk a little bit about what you wanted to do for this book and what it meant to you, why you decided to share your story?
Writing the book was really an act of self-preservation because even over a decade after leaving hate groups in 1994, the impact of the harm that I had done to innocent people, harm to the world, harm to my family, and harm to myself was still reverberating. And I needed to find some way to reconcile it. I needed some sort of cathartic process to tell the story and to be accountable for my past and be accountable for that harm. And also is really important to me to reach other people out there who might be under the influence of this ideology to let them know that there's a much better way to live their lives.
Yeah, that's so important. Like you mentioned, the accountability part. It's one thing to get out of a vicious cycle, but it's another thing to really take ownership of that. And I think it's awesome what you're doing now. We're going to get into at the end of your story all the ways in which you're giving back and helping the youth get out of these type of cycles. But obviously, we need to start with your story. So let's talk about your childhood. I know you got in pretty young, and I think that played a huge role in how you eventually just got sucked into it.
Yeah, and I think the best way to start talking about that is just to talk about my experience with other formers, as we're known in the counter-violent extremism space. I'm a former violent extremist, and I have friends who are formers from every stripe of violent extremist ideology you can think of. Of course, I know many other former white nationalists. My job today is creating former white nationalists. So I have a lot of experience talking to my peers, so to speak. But I also know a lot of formers from other flavors of violent extremism. A colleague of mine, Mubin Sheikh, is a dear friend who I've been waging peace with for over a decade. And Mubin, as he puts it, is a former terrorist in Muslim clothing. And so I know a lot
Wow.
of people who are formers out of violent Islamism. One of my dearest friends is a guy in Denmark who's a former Antifa. And 30 years ago, him and I would have killed each other on sight. And nowadays, we organize community meals and help kids get skate parks built and stuff like that. And
Wow.
the reason I mention other formers is I work with people in this space, and I have friends who are formers. I'm as interested in their story as they are in mine. And so I listen to them. A lot of them have books. A lot of them are speakers. For the majority of formers, if you ask about their childhood, you're going to come across a lot of what they call adverse childhood experiences in the mental health field. Now, I need to be clear here. I don't have letters after my name. I have 3 failed attempts at college degrees, but never completed one yet. But I hang out with a lot of people who have letters after their name, and I get some little bit of mental health chops just through osmosis. And I mention adverse childhood experiences because glancing at my childhood, you wouldn't have seen any. I grew up in a nice house in a nice neighborhood. My parents were together. They loved me very much. They let me know that at every turn. I never went hungry. I never took a beating. My Neither of my parents were abusive, but my father is an alcoholic. And growing up, that put a lot of pressure on my mom. Now, when I say my dad was an alcoholic, again, a lot of people will think dad was mean, he was abusive, and that really wasn't the case. My dad's not a mean drunk, he's a fun drunk. When my dad's drunk, like when I was a little kid, it meant we are going to light off fireworks in the backyard and shoot guns in the basement, which was a lot of fun for a little kid, a little boy, and my little younger brother. Like we had fun doing that. But it wasn't fun for my mom, who at times was working 2 jobs to keep the lights on and the bills paid in her nice house in a nice neighborhood. And we're in the basement at midnight on a school night shooting my dad's 1911 Colt 45. So my mother was just completely, literally at the end of her rope throughout my childhood. And her relationship with my dad sucked. They fought constantly, and it was really about the financial pressures of the household. We were really living beyond our means. And rather than be a good kid and be like, hey, mom, I love you. How can I help? I started to distance myself from her and from my father, who, despite his disease, did love me very much. And of course, as I distanced myself from the people who love me, my suffering grew worse. It began this vicious cycle that resulted in me lashing out at other kids. A real core principle of mine, and it's not just a principle, it's a tool that I use on a daily basis, is the truth that hurt people.
Mm-hmm.
And looking back at my childhood, I was a little kid, I was hurting, and I didn't find a way to process that pain in a healthy way. So I passed it on to other people. The other dynamic of this that's important to mention, I think, and again, this is me like looking back on my past and trying to sort it out. I obviously wasn't aware of any of this at the time, but a lot of what I do now is kind of Monday morning psychoanalysis. Like, what the hell was I thinking? Where did I go wrong? What happened here?
Yeah.
And when I was since my earliest memories, to my parents and to my extended family and to all the adults in my life, teachers, principals, what have you, I was like this golden boy, prodigal son. Like everyone was like, Arnie's so wonderful. He's so gifted. He's such a genius. He can do anything. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. But looking back, my theory is that while all these people were telling me how wonderful I was, inside I was hurting. And I didn't know how to express it. I didn't know how to process it. And so I got in my head, like, I'm not wonderful. I'm horrible. And if you don't believe it, watch what I do to this kid on the school bus. Watch what I do to this teacher's classroom. Watch what I do to the society. And that's how it began. It began as being a bully on the school bus in kindergarten. I got a thrill from antisocial behavior. It was a thrill to see other kids terrified of me. It was a thrill to see their parents coming onto the bus and yelling at me. Like the more chaos I caused, the more of a kick I got. And it became an addiction really quickly. And it's important to understand this through the lens of addiction, because a lot of the work I do now is about treating hate as an addiction the same way we would treat addiction to alcohol or drugs. Now, being my father's son and being Arno the fourth, I come from a long line of Arnos, and they're all alcoholics. My mom's not an alcoholic, but there's a lot of alcoholism on her side of the family as well. And alcoholism is a genetic disease as well as an environmental one. So I was pretty much doomed to become an alcoholic the first time I drank at age 14. Now, the first time I got drunk, I probably had 3-4 beers and I passed out. 20 years later, at age 34, when I quit drinking, I could drink 18 beers in an evening and still function the next day. And
Whoa.
that's the nature of substance abuse. The amount of the substance that gets you high the first time doesn't get you high 10 times later. So you have to keep escalating your intake of the substance in order to get the same kind of buzz. My antisocial behavior worked in the exact same way. After a while, I was no longer thrilled by bullying this kid by myself on the school bus, so I got a bunch of other kids to beat him up. I went from that to fights in the schoolyard, to breaking and entering, vandalism, drinking at age 14. By the time I was 16, I was a full-blown alcoholic. I had been violent since I was a little kid. I literally have an addiction to antisocial behavior, and I can never get enough of it. I can never shock people enough. I can never repulse people enough. And that's when I was introduced to white nationalism through white power skinhead music.
Do you think any of this had to do with self-esteem? Because you had mentioned that you distance yourself from your loving caregivers. You were asking for love, but then when people gave it to you in the form of praise, you turned it away as if you weren't worthy of their attention and you wanted to prove them wrong. Do you think that's where maybe self-esteem came in?
Yeah, and it doesn't feel right to say yes, because but my entire life, and it's important to understand, and I'm sure you're aware of this, there's a big difference between ego and self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was always the center of attention. Throughout my childhood, throughout my school days, everyone at school knew who I was. Half the people loved me, half the people hated me. Very few people had a neutral opinion of me. But I was always like, had a lot of attention on me. A lot of people praised me. But I think you're right. Like deep down inside, I didn't have a healthy sense of self-esteem. And looking back, all the way back to those days when I was really little and everybody said, oh, he's so wonderful. I think at that point, a not just lack of self-esteem, but a self-hatred was kind of brewing that gained momentum and weight as I grew older.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm wondering, looking back from who you are now, and especially now that you're working with the youth and trying to get them to break those same cycles, what do you think would have gotten through to you at that age to help you gain a self-esteem or help you feel differently about yourself?
It's different for every kid. And I think the more like offerings we have for children, for them to find their passion and really get into a groove of something where they can feel really good about themselves, the better off we are as a society. In my case, I had all sorts of creative outlets provided for me. My mother is one of the most amazing artists I've ever witnessed in my life. And at her peak, she worked in every medium you could imagine. She was constantly creating things. And when we were little kids, my mom would take me and my brother to the zoo with sketch pads and crayons and colored pencils. And my mom would draw like a perfect, beautiful picture of an elephant. And my brother would draw a picture of a tiger. And I'd draw a picture of the tiger eating the elephant. Like there's everything. I love to draw, and I was a really good artist, but all of my drawings were war and violence and killing. And if there wasn't like guns and explosions and weapons involved, I wasn't interested. So even though I for many people, like, art can be that outlet, it can be the means of like expressing yourself and finding yourself. For me, it was just another vector to express my angst. What I think really would have diverted me would be martial arts. As a kid, I was obsessed with martial arts. I was obsessed with Bruce Lee. We used to have this thing on back when there were 3 TV channels. On the the oddball one, there was Black Belt Theater every Saturday night, sorry. And me and my buddies would watch it and whack the snot out of each other with pool sticks and jump around yelling. And I wanted to learn that. Like, I wanted to be that. And the problem is that martial arts cost money. And my parents didn't have any. Like, they barely had enough money to feed us and keep us clothed. So they couldn't really send me to Taekwondo like my buddies were all going to. And this was going on throughout my childhood. And it was the summer between 3rd and 4th grade. There was a judo program through the rec department, like in the high school gym, for 6 weeks during the summer. And it was pretty cheap because it was through the rec department. So my parents scraped together the $75 to put me in judo for 6 weeks. And I'll never forget, my sensei was a Latina woman who was an Olympic judokan.
Whoa.
And she was pretty diminutive. She was small, but this class had not just kids, but men as well. And there were full grown men like my size now, 6'3", 200 something pounds. And this woman would just be like, kapow, like just throwing them on their ass like it was nothing. And I was just in awe of her. And while up until that point, there really wasn't an adult on earth who could tell me what to do. Like, just being in this woman's presence, I would just be standing there like at attention, awaiting her instruction. And I love that environment. I loved judo. I was really good at it. I went from white belt to yellow belt to orange belt in 6 weeks. I was competing in tournaments. I was all about judo, and that's all I wanted to do. And then all of a sudden, the 6-week program is over, and now they want $75 a week to stay in. And my parents were like, yeah, we can't afford that. Sorry. So it actually ended up backfiring to a bit, because now I'm really pissed off because I can't stand judo. And I've had enough instruction to where I'm more dangerous than I was already. And even like going forward later on when I'm out brawling in the streets, I'm like using things I learned in judo class to get in fights in the streets. But I honestly believe that had I been able to stay in martial arts, that would have diverted me from where I ended up.
Yeah, a healthy outlet, because it seems like you did have respect for the right authority, the authority that you looked up to personally. And so I feel like that probably plays into when you're introduced into the white supremacist movement and there is clear leadership and ranking, it probably felt familiar.
Well, it in a sense, it really, when I got involved in the movement, as we called it, I became that authority. My friends and I, who started the skinhead gang, because we were all introduced to white nationalism through music. Remember, this is the late 1980s, so it's pre-internet. The vector for violent extremist ideology that we know it today, as far as social media goes and backwater internet websites, like, didn't exist. So the way that white nationalism spread amongst youth in the late 80s, to the point where Oprah did a show on it, was through bootleg cassette tapes. Seeing the power of music to reach people. And I had been into punk rock for a couple of years before that, and I was in a punk rock band, and I don't have a lick of musical talent, but I could scream really loud and I could get people crazy on stage, and I was good at it. And me and my buddies put a white power band together, and that band was like a magnet for every pissed off white kid in Wisconsin. And because like we started this organically, we were in touch with the first white power skinhead crew in the United States was a group from Chicago, and we were in touch with them.
Right.
And even early on, like, some of those guys came to visit us in Milwaukee, and we're like, oh, this is cool. Like, they're coming up here. But then when they got up here, they're like, kind of had this attitude like they were in charge of us, and we're like, you're not, nobody's in charge of us, buddy. And then we got violent with them, and that's really how we operated. we were a friend of mine who I started the gang with, and who was in my band, a guy named Pat O'Malley. The way he put it, he said we were like feral kids that no one had any control of, and we were the ones calling the shots. So like I very much became that authority myself, rather than being subservient to someone else. And actually, like, the more noise we made, all these old school neo-Nazis started crawling out from under their rocks. And again, the ones who, not that any of them are really smart, but the more foolish ones would come out and like try to assume command of us.
Because they were older?
Yeah, because they were older and they'd been around a while, and these guys got beat up like anybody else. Like nobody was going to command us. But the smarter ones would be like, okay, yeah, you guys are great. Do what you're doing. You take the lead. You run with this. But here, read this.
Yeah.
Here, read that. And they would kind of slip us literature of white nationalist movement that really kind of gave our drunken hooliganism an ideology to drive it.
Yeah. I have to know before we move on here, did you at the time know Chris Picciolini? We just had him on.
I did later on. The Chicago guys I'm talking about were the same guys who Chris got involved with.
Okay.
And later on, I did know Chris. For a time, Chris was the manager of our band Centurion.
He was the manager.
He was the manager of our band. And you know, I was like, and how much money do we pay Chris? And we pay Chris 5% of everything, which was nothing. there was no money being made. And Christian is very good at promotion nowadays, but he wasn't able to get us any action as a band back in those days. But I did know Christian from back then, and I actually invited him to be a part of Life After Hate when I founded it in 2009. And so we worked together for a bit then. It didn't really end well. And I know Christian's out doing his thing today, and wish him all the best.
Yeah. Yeah, I found that interesting because you're talking about the people who brought it to America in Chicago, and I was like, that's Christian. We just talked to him. So I wondered the crossover there.
He didn't bring it to Chicago. He caught on to it while it was there. There was another guy named Clark Martell who was kind of the wellspring of everything that happened in Chicago, and Chris had a cousin who was one of Clark's guys, and that's how Chris got involved.
Yeah. He talks about how he was basically groomed into it by Clark. So I find it interesting. And on the other hand, you're the one who is leading the charge. You're like, no, you guys follow me. Okay, so you were introduced through music, and obviously the lyrics have a story to tell. But what made you say, you know what, I want to start my own group and I'm going to be the leader? And how did you know how to be the white nationalist that you became?
I've always had kind of a talent for leadership. A really good way to put this all in perspective, and this like explains a lot. In 6th grade, I had a little pack of other bullies that we ran with in school, and we would take other kids' lunch money and bully them and just generally be nuisances. And this was in 6th grade, I think it was like 1980 or so. And it was back when Patty Hearst, the newspaper Harris, was kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army. It was on the news, and to this day, I hate the news. And when I was a kid, my parents were always like, the news is on. Shut up. The news is on. We have to watch the news. And I would try to avoid the news at all costs, as I do nowadays. But I caught that term Liberation Army as the news was talking about the Symbionese Liberation Army. And I was like, Liberation Army. That sounds really good. So in 6th grade, years before I got involved in white nationalism, I thought it would be great to name my little crew of bullies the Kids Liberation Army. And what the Kids Liberation Army did was we fought against the teachers' oppression because they were oppressing us by not letting us bully and rob the other kids.
Well, there's a take. There's a hot take. Hey, teachers, leave us kids alone.
Exactly. And what the actions of the Kids Liberation Army were was I and looking back, like I would have the FBI knocking on my door if I did this nowadays, but I would draw pictures of me and my buddies like violently dismembering teachers
What?
and shooting teachers and like taking over the school, and I'd like leave it where they could find it. And the Kids Liberation Army went down in flames when I got a week in-house suspension for creating my KLA propaganda. And my guys, in order to like, make a statement, went to the dentist office next door to the playground and stole the hubcaps off of Mercedes. And they were apprehended trying to get the hubcaps out of the school bus going home. and the Kids Liberation Army was disbanded after that. But as silly as that was, and again, it is now, if a sixth grade kid nowadays is drawing pictures of his classmates and teachers being dismembered or shot, like rightfully so, everybody springs into action and be like, okay, this can't happen. But back then it was like, oh, it was just kind of it wasn't like not a big deal, but there was an FBI involved. But in any case, I mention it because I was always good at like getting other kids to be like, yeah, whatever we're gonna do, let's do it. And Pat was like that a lot as well. Pat was super charismatic, and between him and I and the band, like what we started going just really kind of caught fire and got its own momentum.
Okay, so you kind of just figure out what it means to be a white supremacist and just paint by the numbers, or did you create your own type of way?
It was a little of both. We started out, we were really influenced by the music of these British white power skinhead bands, and the lyrics of these songs were literally drawn directly from the romantic violent mythology of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi era. So the first white power skinhead song I heard was called Hail the New Dawn. And it started out with a guitar fading in like, and then you're hearing like, hail, 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 hail. And I'm just like, whoa, hail, yeah, this is awesome. I want to hail. And the song is about race and nation and blood and soil. I knew where it came from, but I didn't really get the full ideological depth of it. To me, it was like, I grew up loving Greek mythology and Norse mythology. I was really into fantasy. I played Dungeons and Dragons, and like the romanticism of this music made me feel like I'm the hero in this quest, and I have to save my people from the evil hordes that want to destroy our world. And it was all very grandiose and enchanting, and again, remember, on top of this, add like a inhuman alcohol intake every single day, and then surrounding myself by other boys who are broken and in the same frame of mind, and this is how it all catches fire and moves forward.
Yeah. How are your parents reacting to this?
It's interesting in that, going back to those very early days, like there was kind of an urban mythology about my childhood. My dad is an amazing storyteller, and I think that's where I get my love of it from. And my dad is also a master craftsman in hyperbole. So he would be like, yeah, when Ernie was 8 months old, we found him 80 feet up in a tree in the backyard, and we had to get a fire truck to come and get him. And I was probably 2 years old and 10 feet up in the tree, but it's that he makes a good story of it. And I was just doing all kinds of crazy things as a kid. My mom, who doesn't exaggerate like my dad, said one morning she got up to find me under a year old. She woke up to go in the kitchen, and I'm standing in the middle of our gas stove with all 4 burners going in my Dr. Denim footy pajamas, which were later recalled because they're highly flammable. And I'm trying to get into the cabinet above the stove where all the poison cleaning stuff is kept.
Oh my gosh.
And so my parents would like take me to the pediatrician, and they're like, what the hell's wrong with this kid? And the pediatrician, God bless him, because again, nowadays kids like that are usually medicated into oblivion. But the pediatrician was like, well, this is because he's a gifted genius and he needs to be challenged and he needs to explore and he needs to be stimulated. So just let him explore and let him basically let him run amok. And that's what my parents did from a very early age. Like the only discipline they got was just to try to keep me from hurting or killing myself. But other than that, there was very little discipline in my life. And many people hear my story now and they're just like, you just needed a good ass whooping as a kid. And I I can't necessarily push back too hard on that. I think there is something to that. I don't believe violence is a way to teach anyone anything, much less children. But be that as it may, by the time I was 14, 15, 16, my parents had completely lost control of me. The first time my dad tried to get physical with me was 14 years too late. I was already bigger than him. And he tried to like physically restrain me from leaving the house one day, and I left him laying on the ground, and I walked out. So by the time I'm getting into the whole skinhead thing, I had dropped out of high school, and I just told my parents. There just wasn't like a discussion. I'm like, I'm dropping out of high school, and I'm moving into Milwaukee with a bunch of other punk rock kids, and that's the way it is. And they had just completely lost control of me at that point. We're like, okay, well, let us know. Keep in touch. Like, we'll buy you
Yeah.
groceries. I have a younger brother who was kind of the polar opposite of me. My first word was no, and his first word was thank you. And
Oh,
he was a very sweet, quiet kid. And by the time I'm just completely running amok, my parents were like, okay, let's just try to keep the older one alive, and then we'll focus on the younger one and try to keep him from going out completely off the rails like the older one was. So
uh-huh.
my parents, they had little inklings of what was going on, but they didn't really understand the depths of it. And even to this day, my mom couldn't read my first book, My Life After Hate. She was just too emotional for her. She did read my second book, which is called The Gift of Our Wounds, which I wrote with a guy named Pardeep Singh Kalika, whose father was murdered by a guy from my old gang in the August 5th,
Mm.
2012 Sikh temple shooting. And my mom read that book. My dad read both the books. Both of them were like, I had no idea it was this bad. And then I said, yeah, and those books are just a wee glimpse. Like, that's nowhere
Mhm.
near everything. So it's one of these cases where they were doing the best they can, and they certainly didn't wash their hands of me. I really got to make a point of saying that of all the planets aligned to facilitate my turnaround, my parents never giving up on me was probably the most important planet of all of them. And they really, I think, did an amazing job, and I love them both very much, and they're both huge supporters of me today. But at the time when I had moved out at age 16, they were just like, okay, well, I just go do your thing, I guess. And they had kind of resigned themselves to it.
Yeah, that must have been really hard for them to feel completely powerless and not really know what you're getting into. So, what were you getting into, Arno, as a 16-year-old who had moved out of the house?
Well, as I mentioned, I moved out of the house into a neighborhood in Milwaukee called River West, which is kind of between the inner city and the posh east side, and it's very much like a amalgam of both. It's kind of got an edge to it, but it's not quite the core of the inner city. And on the other side is like where all the frat boys are at University of Wisconsin Milwaukee. And very early on, like, me and Pat started driving all the punk rockers out of this house and replacing them with skinheads. And we started to get known nationwide, mainly because of our band and because of the vigor that our crew had as more and more people were joining. These transient skinheads would come by every couple weeks. It's interesting to look back because, again, this is pre-social media, and looking back, I think our social network was these transient skinheads who would show up from, like, they had been in Chicago for a little bit, they've been in Detroit for a little bit, they've been in Cincinnati, they've been out west, out east, and they show up. They're typically covered with tattoos, and they got all these stories. And at first, you're like, oh, this is cool. Like, this guy's awesome. He's been all these places. He knows all these people. And they would always have like a battered notebook with lists of post office boxes and the addresses of people who are in prison. And they typically had a stolen calling card number or two. And that's how we communicated, and that's how our social network grew, was through these battered notebooks, stolen credit card, calling card numbers, and post office boxes. Now, the reality of these transient skinheads is that after a couple weeks of them crashing on our couch, drinking all of our beer and eating all of our food and not working and not bringing any money to the mix, a lot of them got ridden out of town on a rail pretty quick. But that was only after these connections had been made. And these connections are what brought us from just like the Milwaukee crew to later join a larger organization called Hammerskin Nation. That our crew was like the first Northern Hammerskins chapter, and that began what later became the largest organized white power skinhead gang on the planet Earth. At its peak, the Hammerskins were operational on every continent but Antarctica, and there was like crews all over the world who communicated and had bands and created their own kind of ruckus wherever they were. But really what this looked like was my friends and I were radiating hate and violence into the world around us. When I think about this, I think about my other past life as an information technology consultant. Now, I don't want to spend too much time talking about that because it was just too traumatic. All the IT people get that. But I mentioned IT because when we're using a device, as I'm using my laptop to talk to you now, these devices are machines that provide output according to the input that we give it. So to get this link, I go to my Gmail. That's the input. The output is, there's my email. In my email is the link to communicate with you. I input by clicking the link. The output is this interface that we're talking on. And I mention inputs and outputs because not just human society, but really the entire universe is a big giant system composed of an infinite number of systems within systems within systems, and they're all interacting, they're all interdependent. What happened was when we're inputting hate and violence into the world, the output that the world gives us is hate and violence.
Mm-hmm.
So within 6 months of starting this gang, we had some kids come to do a drive-by on our house. Pat shot at them and hit one of these kids, and Pat went to prison for what we saw as defending our house.
Mm-hmm.
Within a year, another dear friend of mine who I brought into the gang, he was exactly 1 year younger than me. He was out practicing hate and violence as I had taught him to do when he was shot and killed in a street fight.
Oh.
Horrible things kept happening to us. We kept bringing misfortune upon ourselves because of our actions. But because we're under the influences of this ideology that's all about hate and blame and irresponsibility, we didn't have the introspection to be like, hey, maybe we should do things differently, and then all this bad stuff wouldn't happen to us. We didn't have that mindfulness. So instead we said, oh, all these bad things happen because Jews hate us, because Jews are trying to kill the white race, because all these savage non-white people are taking over our society. It was always blaming everyone else for these misfortunes that we brought upon ourselves, which, as you can imagine, creates a vicious cycle that just sends your life spiraling further and further downward.
Yeah.
And that's what happened for 7 years.
Wow. I'm glad you brought that up because that was my next question to you. The power and control in this kind of vision of an army that you're running makes sense from a teenager's perspective of wanting that, especially when you had this love and passion for self-defense or fighting, I guess you could say.
Right.
But the racism part, that's where I wondered, how did you devolve mentally into that? And I think you just answered it, where it was just this confirmation bias of you had started this violence is then given back to you, and it's the confirmation bias of, see, that's the problem. Is that what it was?
That's a very succinct way of summing it up. And it's important to understand also the reason why the swastika first attracted me was because it's so repulsive to civil society.
The rebellion itself is what
The
attracted
shock
you.
value of the swastika is what I was initially attracted to. But before I was a skinhead, I was a punk rocker, and I had a big giant mohawk hairdo because in the late 80s, that was shocking. Like that would shock people. You could reliably get in a fight walking down the street if you had a mohawk. Nowadays, it's pretty passe. Like it's not even a thing anymore because it's been done to death. But back then, it was shocking. Also, when I was a punk rocker, I remember in shop class one time, I was never really brought up in any kind of religious background. My parents are both like spiritual, not religious. And I was always like, whatever the status quo was or whatever I saw as the status quo, I not only wanted nothing to do with that, but I wanted to offend it. I wanted to push back against it. So as a 14-year-old punk rocker in freshman in high school in shop class, I made an upside down cross earring about this big.
Oh, jeez.
And I had to go around wearing it just to shock people. Like, ha ha, Satan, yeah, take that. Like, and I didn't care about Satan. I didn't worship Satan, but I just knew that if I said Satan and I had an upside down cross earring, everybody would lose their mind and go, oh my God, oh, he said Satan. It was just poking at what I saw as civil society. Well, if you think an upside down cross shocks people, if you think a mohawk shocks people, try a swastika. Swastikas really shock people. And I wasn't ignorant as to why. I knew why swastikas shock people. I knew about the Holocaust. The suburb I grew up in had a lot of Jewish people living there. Growing up, I had a lot of Jewish friends. In sixth grade, I went to all kinds of bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs, and I had a great time. There was always fun, and I was glad I was invited. So again, there's never a good excuse for anti-Semitism, but I had like beyond no excuse. I had nothing but good experiences with Jewish people. I had no valid grudge against them, but because, and again, this is where it's important to understand it from the addiction lens, because I have this addiction to shocking people, to antisocial behavior, that's why the swastika appealed to me. I know all sorts of people are in recovery, and I know former heroin addicts who at times would prostitute themselves in order to get their drugs. Now, they didn't feel good about doing that. They weren't happy about prostituting themselves, but they didn't care as long as they got their hit, as long as they got their drugs. And that's how my relationship with the swastika was. I think deep down, I knew it was wrong. I knew why it repulsed people, but I didn't care as long as I got that rush of shocking and repulsing civil society. So that was my gateway into the racist aspect of it. And then like you so brilliantly put a finger on it, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. As I run around going, I hate black people, I hate Jews, I hate gays, I hate everything, and it would bring down heat upon me, then I would say, oh, okay, that verifies how the Jews are out to get us.
Yeah.
That verifies how all black people hate white people. Like, and so that was how the you start falling down that rabbit hole.
How interesting that it started as a complete facade just for the shock value, and then you started to believe it. So my question to you would be, I know that some of the rhetoric that the neo-Nazis have is the fact that the Holocaust never happened, or I was reading in Christian's book, he was saying, well, some Jews may have died, but it wasn't that bad. But you had a clear understanding of the Holocaust. Did you eventually start to devolve into the beliefs that it never happened?
If you would have asked me, I would have vehemently explained to you how the Holocaust was a hoax.
Really?
Oh yeah. Now, did I believe that deep down? Looking back, I don't know that I did.
Okay.
But just once you assume this persona,
you have to keep up with it.
I'm a born extremist. Like I don't to this day, I have a real problem with moderation in all sorts of ways. Even though I quit drinking 20 years ago and I'm not in any extremist groups, like I have a hard problem not eating Cops double cheeseburgers with the works every day because I like food. Like so when I'm getting into white nationalism, I get into it. I go into it full bore. And the other part of this addiction aspect is understanding that when you're high on hate, you're being distracted from your trauma and from your vulnerabilities and from everything that's wrong in your life. The same way you have the stereotypical drunk at a bar crying in his beer, trying to forget his garbage job or forget his broken heart or whatever. And if you drink enough beer, you forget it for a minute. The same thing happens with hate. when you are literally cultivating hate, and in my case, like putting into music and blasting that music out to the world, it's creating a buzz, it's getting you high, and it's distracting you from what's really wrong in your life. And looking back, I think what's really wrong is I hated myself. I didn't have a good relationship with myself, and I had no idea what to do about that. I didn't even understand that was the problem back then. But what that hate distracted me from that. And the same way that getting drunk or getting high would distract someone from other pain points in their life.
Yeah, that makes sense. In a lot of these Christian groups that we cover on this channel, it tends to be the opposite, where there's a lot of toxic positivity, where anger and depression and all of that is seen as a sin or seen as the devil kind of seeping into your life. And it seemed like for you, it was the only emotions available to you were hate, frustration, all of this rage. Did you ever allow yourself the softer emotions to feel happy, or was that just not even on the table?
In all honesty, there was, I look back at friendships I had during those times. My friendship with Pat was as close to like a really legitimate, awesome friendship as you could have in that environment. And I would say the same with a number of other guys I knew back then. But these are all relationships that were stunted and stopped from becoming what they potentially could because of the hate and violence. There was glimpses of actual human connection happening here and there. My relationship with women, I had a number of girlfriends throughout that time. The last being the woman who became the mother of my child. There were times, brief times, and again, like this is like between raindrops, when I think I was experiencing what true love felt like. But it could never last, because it was like a wee candle trying to stay alight in this heaving maelstrom of hate and violence that's constantly, raging around my life. And again, this is part of the addiction story, in that when you're addicted to hate, it stops you from experiencing your humanity the same way an addiction to alcohol does.
Yeah. I imagine that would have been really exhausting to constantly be in that state, was it?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because the most frequently asked question I get is, how did you get out? What made you change? And as you're probably understanding right now, I'm a pretty long-winded guy, and I like telling, long verbose answers, but the succinct answer to how I got out: exhaustion. It was exhausting living that way. If you go to any 12-step meeting, you go to an AA meeting or an NA meeting, you're going to see a bunch of people sitting in a room, and they're all there because they're sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Mm.
And that's the exact same reason that I got out of the movement, was because I was sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah. I would love for you to tell the story of that moment that shattered your reality with your mother at dinner.
Yeah, I was 18 years old, so it would have been Thanksgiving of 1989. I had a skinhead girlfriend named Mandy with me, and we went to Thanksgiving with my family, which was always pretty dysfunctional from the get-go. My mom and my grandma were typically the only sober people at Thanksgiving, at least above the age of 16. And so I'm there with my girlfriend, and we're both rip roaring drunk, and my dad's drunk, and my brother's drunk, and my aunt's drunk. And I'm at the Thanksgiving table, and I'm all like, the white race and blah, blah, blah. And I'm going on about all my white nationalist nonsense. And my mom just stops me in my tracks, and she goes, excuse me, Mr. Nazi, do you know that your great grandpa Bordeaux was part Native American? So you're not even white. And I was like, don't you like that? Don't you ever say that. And I'm looking at my grandma to waiting for her to say that's not true. And she's just kind of nodding. And my dad and my aunt are just kind of, yeah. And I'm like, no, that's not true. That's not true at all. And I literally went stomping out of Thanksgiving. Mandy and I went back to this hovel we were living in with like 80 other skinheads. I locked myself in my room I had a case of glass beer bottles, and I sat down and just kept working my way through the case of beer. And towards the end of it, I just thought the only recourse I had was to kill myself because I wasn't white.
Mm,
And so
wow.
I smashed one of the bottles and I started carving at my wrist with it.
That same night. I
Oh,
didn't
yeah.
realize that was the same night.
Oh, yeah, it was the same night. In all honesty, I don't know that it would have been a fatal wound, but I ended up passing out from the blood loss and the alcohol. Mandy ends up like kicking the door in, and it's always good to have skinhead girls around if you're going to try to kill yourself because they're not squeamish at the sight of blood and they typically know enough basic first aid to keep you from bleeding out. And that's what Mandy did. And I woke up the next day, and at the time, like the big honcho in the white nationalist movement was a guy named Tom Metzger, who was he was in the Klan a long time ago, and then he started his own thing, and he was very like violent, and he loved skinheads, and we all loved him. And I sat down and I wrote him a letter, and I said, Tom, my mom told me that I'm 1/16th Indian, and I just want to die. I try to kill myself, and I can't fight for my race because I'm not white. And he wrote me right back, and he said, if you got a nosebleed, I didn't tell him I slit my wrist, but he would have said like, well, you just bled out all your Indian blood.
Oh,
If you had got a nosebleed, you would lose your Indian blood. Like, you're still a good white man. Stay with the movement. We need you. You're a good warrior for our people. And after I was like, oh, okay, cool. All right, we're back on.
whoa.
Like, that was.
What? Oh my
And
gosh.
here's the kicker. I think it was during COVID. There was like a 23andMe Groupon, and I got it for me and my daughter, and we both did it. And I don't have a lick of indigenous blood
It didn't show up.
in me whatsoever. And my mom's like, well, that's not true. Your great grandpa, I know your great grandpa born out. I'm like, all right, well, whatever. But not that I would have been honored to have some Native American blood, but I don't. And I think that just drives home like how twisted I was just the idea of me not
Right.
being a 1000% pure blooded Aryan white man was so catastrophic to me that I didn't even want to live.
Yeah. I mean, at that point, you are truly in it. You go from the facade to 1,000% believing in this ideology, even though it's misguided.
Right.
So you have a daughter, and this is kind of what starts to wake you up to the realities of you potentially not being there for her, right?
Exactly. And the other irony of this is always irony upon irony, but the reason I have a daughter is because her mother and I at the time felt it was our duty as white people to produce white children.
Oh, wow.
A huge kind of fear generator in white nationalism back then as it is now. And first of all, nowadays I don't live under the construct of race. I don't consider myself white. I don't, not to say I don't see color. I understand race is a horrible thing that has been plaguing humanity for 400 years. It's caused massive amounts of suffering and it continues to. But I honestly make a conscious, intentional effort to see every single human being as a unique individual and not a political abstraction, which race is one of many. But at the time, we were like, well, the white birth rate compared to everybody else's birth rate is like flatline, if not negative, while everybody else is having all sorts of kids. If we don't start cranking out white kids, we're going to be outnumbered. Like, well, hey, newsflash, Mr. Nazi, you're already outnumbered 50 to 1 on this planet, so you kind of missed that boat. But that was a big, if I'm recruiting Joe pissed off white kid, which is my archetype that I'm talking to, that's one of the fear points I would tell them. Is like, they're outbreeding us. They all have 1 million kids at once and they're all over the place and we're not having any kids, so there's not going to be any white people left. And we bought into that, and that's why we willfully conceived our daughter. My daughter was born in 1992. I will never forget the day she was born. Her mother had 2 children previously, and she was kind of a pro at that point. And didn't even seem like that big of a deal for her. But for me, I was like, oh my God, like, here's my daughter. And I remember when she was born, the nurse like whisks my daughter from her mother's womb to this little hamburger worm looking thingy. And I went down there and I looked down at her, and she opens her eyes. And for the first time in her life, the first thing she sees is me looking down, adoring her. And it was amazing. And I would love to say, like, that's when I was cured. And that's when I swore off racism. Like, if I would have been a better man, I think I hopefully would have done that. But actually, mom was really tired, and she's like, all right, get the hell out of here. There's a bar down the street. She's like, go get a drink or something. Like, I need to rest, and I'm going to hold her. And I'm like, okay. So I went to the bar, and I got drunk. And a week after my daughter was born came suicide attempt number 2, which was much closer to being successful. A week after my daughter was born, we're back at our house. My younger brother and I go out to a bar. We get in this huge brawl. I come back like 2 a.m, stinking drunk, covered in someone else's blood. And my daughter's mother is saying to me, like, you're a piece of garbage. You're supposed to be a father now. You're supposed to be an adult. And this is how you act. Like, you're still acting like a little kid. And she was rightfully enraged at me. And I don't know that I would have anything to say in my defense if I was sober, but as drunk as I was, all I could think of doing was grabbing the nearest weapon, which fortunately was a combat dagger instead of my Mini 14 rifle, which is in the closet. But I grabbed the dagger, which was about a blade like 6 inches long that was sharp enough to shave with. And I just said, is this what you want? And I went, boom, and I just about took my left hand off. Once again, mom, a former skinhead girl, and there was blood like literally spraying all over the room. She wrapped a bed sheet around my hand and knelt on it to keep me from bleeding out while she called 911. All I remember is that as soon as I took the knife to my arm, my grandpa had a grand piano when I was a kid, and I used to crawl around underneath it and see how it worked. And I remember the piano strings, and what it was like taking a wire and snipping the biggest bass string on the piano. It's like that thong, this kind of sensation of tension and it being cut. And I just kind of faded out. The EMTs got there. I came through long enough to take a swing at the EMT. And he's like, I'm trying to save your life, you idiot. And I'm like, ah. And then I fade out again. And then 3 days later, I wake up in an intensive care unit. My bed is surrounded by my girlfriend, my mom, my dad, my brother, a couple guys from my crew. And they're all like looking at me. My brother was so mad at me. And my mom and dad are crying. It was a disaster. But that was the second suicide attempt I made during my involvement in white nationalism. And I'm ashamed to say I did it a week after my daughter was born. So unfortunately, seeing the miracle of my daughter's birth and having her look at me for the first time in her life, like that didn't faze me apparently. And I was just as bad as I ever was. As time went on, go figure, our relationship suffered because of it. But
hold on, Arno, because
Okay.
there's something here which I think needs to be talked about.
Sure.
The first time, it was because you felt like you weren't white supremacist enough.
Right.
And then the second time, you felt like you were too white supremacist for your wife or your girlfriend. And I think there's something there because you're just caught in this identity battle of something that you had been fighting for years and years and years and became a leader of. But all of a sudden, you're expected to switch that off. And your girlfriend, she wasn't your wife, right? Your girlfriend,
Correct.
she's having this come to Jesus moment of, hold on, I'm part of this movement, but I don't want him going causing trouble anymore because I need help. Postpartum's a bitch.
Right.
So she's probably like battling with this. Who did I just literally get into bed with and have a child with?
Right.
And so I think your identity is just being ping-ponged around because you never truly had that sense of self before you created this veneer that took over your life. So I can see how that would have devolved into what happened because you're trying to please people on both ends, and you've never felt enough. You've never felt like you were worthy of this love, and now you have this child and you feel like you're not, at least from my perspective, it feels like you are maybe not feeling worthy enough to care for this child and be a dad. So yeah, what a roller coaster.
I think that's all really valid, and I really appreciate that insight, and I think you're absolutely right. The other aspect of this, though, is that I always say that entire 7 years that I was in the movement was like an ongoing suicide attempt.
Hmm.
Like I literally did not care if I lived or died. I would regularly put myself in situations where I could get killed. I've had bullets whiz by my head. You know, I was just like, whatever, I don't care. And this goes back even further than that. The first tattoos I got, I was as a punk rocker, and I was 14, and they were horrible. Like the worst tattoos you'd ever seen. I was known as the land of stupid tattoos for a while, actually. And when I had these tattoos, of course, these adults would say to me when I'm 16, 17, and I have these ridiculous, horrible homemade tattoos, they're like, well, how are you going to feel about that tattoo when you're 80? And I'd just be like, I ain't going to live to be 21. Like, and that was, I of course, I enjoyed like the shock value of that, but there was a part of me that really bought into that. Where it's like, I didn't intend to live till I was 80 by any means. When I was a 16-year-old punk or 14-year-old punk rocker, 16-year-old skinhead. And that's why both of these actual suicide attempts I made were, I wouldn't say like taken lightly, but I would say that I was always on the lookout for a good excuse to kill myself.
Wow, you really just had no sense of self-preservation.
Right. In both situations, like, oh, here's a good excuse. I'm not white. Here's a good excuse. I'm not worthy of being a father. That's how I sorted out. But everything you had to say about me struggling with my identity and who I was trying to be, who people wanted me to be, I think that's all super valid as well.
Yeah, it's kind of just a mixture of everything. That makes sense. So then, what was the moment when you realized you really did need to drop this ideology, that it wasn't serving you, that you didn't want to be a part of it anymore?
I was getting to, I always say, go figure, but my relationship with my girlfriend didn't work out.
Oh, right.
A stud. Go figure, but hate and violence and alcohol and suicide attempts is not a recipe for a healthy relationship between a man and a woman.
Yeah.
So her and I broke up. She had her other two kids were living with their dad down in Florida, and she went down there to be closer to them. And initially she was trying to take our daughter with her. And it was really then, by this time my daughter's 18 months old. This is about a year and a half after this attempt. I was enamored with my daughter as soon as she was born, for sure. But at the same time, I had this thing that I think a lot of guys have with newborns, where you're just kind of like, what is this little thing? Like, I don't get this. And when the kid starts to get older and they're crawling and they're smiling and they're starting to talk and you can see their personality, then you're like, wow, I really love this kid. Like, you're not taking this kid away from me. And so that's how I felt by the time my daughter was 18 months old. She was just absolutely amazing. She was walking around. She was really funny. She had this little voice. And I was like, yeah, you're not taking her with you. And my family, God bless them, like, called in all the extended family, and we scraped enough money together for an attorney. I had to actually take a DNA test to prove my paternity, because mom had been separated but not legally divorced from her ex at the time my daughter was born. And so I did all that, and I basically said, I'm taking my daughter, and she didn't put up too much of a fight. And here I am, a single parent now. A couple months after I'm settling into single parenthood, my band played at a concert in Racine, Wisconsin. And after the concert, a second friend of mine was shot and killed in a street fight. And this guy he was the singer in another band. And he had two little kids. And by this time, I had lost count of how many of my friends had been incarcerated. So that's when it finally hit me that if I don't change my ways, death or prison is going to take me from my daughter. But I think it's so important to understand that I mentioned these planets aligning. Like, had the planets not all aligned, that second street fight death could have driven me further into it.
Mm-hmm.
It was really because I was so exhausted, because my parents never gave up on me, because of my daughter, but also because people I claimed to hate treated me with kindness over and over again throughout the 7-year period that I'm trying to be a white nationalist. All of those things kind of falling into place to lead me to a point where I'm so exhausted after the second murder happened that I just said, okay, that's it. This is when I'm walking away. And that's what I chose to do.
Oh, wow. So you got full custody of your daughter.
We initially hammered out a joint custody where my daughter was going to spend 6 months in Key West and 6 months by me up until she got to school age, and then it was going to be revisited. But her mom had a lot going on down in Key West, and I was just like, yeah, I don't want to, I'm going to keep her up there with me. And her mom didn't really put up much of a fight. So that's why I
Oh,
moved back
wow.
in with my mom, and to my mom helped me. By this time, my parents were divorced. My dad had moved out to Oregon, and me and my mother basically raised my daughter at our house in the suburb we lived in.
What a turn of events. What was your mom's reaction to you coming home asking for help to raise your child?
My mom was just absolutely in love with my daughter from day
Yeah.
one. As a woman who had two boys, one of whom was just a holy hellion from hell, and the other one was like a really nice, sweet, gentle little boy. But my mom was always like, "Oh, little girl!" Like she was so happy to have a granddaughter. My mom was delighted to help, and my mom is just one of the most amazing human beings I've ever met. I'm so lucky to be her son. And
Yeah.
she welcomed us into the house, and my whole family is super supportive. My dad would help out with money if I needed it. My brother is like an awesome, to this day he's an awesome uncle to my daughter. Quite often as I was raising my daughter, I was always kind of more of a buddy than a dad. I was always hanging out with her, like her and I were like this, and we're still very close, but I was never like the lay down the law kind of dad figure that every kid needs in their life. And my brother would like fill that role at times, and him and my daughter are really close as well.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I can
Yeah.
imagine your mom just being so thrilled that you had laid down that lifestyle and you're coming to her for help. And she's luckily one of those parents who's amazing and has unconditional love for their children and
Oh yeah.
welcomed you and helped you get back on your feet. I think that's amazing.
Yeah. I'm a very, very lucky guy.
Yeah, so I think we need to talk about a few of those instances that you mentioned that people who you claim to hate would show you kindness and how that really kind of stuck with you.
So it's important to understand that as a white nationalist skinhead, everything I did was meant to provoke hostility from anyone I met. For everything from my appearance, that was the whole point of being a skinhead. The reason you shave your head is it's like the exact opposite of the Ku Klux Klan. Whereas the Ku Klux Klan, their whole thing was like this anonymity where, you don't know who's in the Klan, you don't know who's behind the hood. And they go about their lives as like this normal dude, and then on Saturday they have a Klan hood on and they're at some rally. The skinheads are the total opposite of that. Being a skinhead meant every waking moment of your life, everywhere you went, you were like wearing your race and your ideology on your sleeve. And you're like everybody you meet, like, I'm a white power skinhead. You got a problem with that? That's what being a skinhead was. So I wanted to provoke people into hating me. I wanted to provoke people into violence. I'm a big dude. I was 6'3" when I was 14 years old, and I'm physically pretty imposing, but I'm also really uncoordinated. So even when I was getting in a lot of fights all the time, I got my ass kicked just as often as I may have beat other people up. I remember many times getting into it with like people who know how to box, and I'm just like, I'm just getting lit up. And but no matter whether I lost the fight or won the fight, if it devolved to violence, I won. That was my victory.
Mhm.
And there was many times where I just got the snot kicked out of me, and I walked out of that like, yeah, I'm a warrior. Like that was how I was. So with that frame of reference, I dropped out of high school at age 16, and that's when I moved out as well. My mom's like, look, we don't have money to support you as you're out doing whatever you're doing. So if you want to move out, you're gonna have to get a job. And I'm like, yeah, I'll get a job, whatever. And my mom had a high school buddy named Jack Cooper who had a business where he printed T-shirts. And he was an old friend of the family. My dad was a business partner with him for many years, actually. He had like a study abroad company that was doing really well for a minute. And my mom asked Jack to give me a job. So at 16 years old, I drop out of high school and I start printing T-shirts 40 hours a week, third shift. And as soon as I started working there, like I got a shaved head. I'm always reeking of beer. I typically got stitches and scars all over me from some fight or another. I got swastika patches on my jacket. I had a swastika tattooed on my middle finger at the time. You didn't have to be a sociologist to understand what I was about when you met me. Despite that, my coworkers who were Afro-American and Latino and Asian, and my supervisor who was a lesbian woman, like they're always going like, oh, hey, what's up, skinhead? Like they would just kind of like tongue in cheek kind of laugh at my whole thing and not get intimidated by it. And they would treat me with kindness. My supervisor, her name was Marcy, was like, also she was in a band and like into punk rock, and I despise cigarette smoking now, like I can't even tell you. But back then I smoked, and of course I was always broke, so I never had cigarettes. And Marcy would like give me cigarettes at break time, and we'd talk about bands. And the whole time I'd be sitting there like, what the hell am I doing? I hate lesbians. I hate gay people.
Right.
But Marcy's cool. Like Marcy's nice to me. And she was a really cool, nice person. My coworkers, very often I didn't have a lunch during at lunchtime at work because I'm too much of a drunk to pack a lunch. And one day, and this is third shift, so it's the middle of the night, I'm in the corner of the break room, like collapsed in this pathetic, hungover, starving heap. And one of my Afro-American coworkers, a guy named Lonnie, is like opening up his lunch. He's got a sandwich cut in half, and he sees me in the corner, and he's like, hey, skinhead, you want half this sandwich, man? You look really hungry. Like the last thing I want to do is take a sandwich from a black guy. I'm an Aryan warrior. Like I don't need anything from these savages. But like hunger is a pretty powerful motivator. So I'm like, yeah. And I get up and I snatch a sandwich out of his hand, and I go back in the corner and wolf it down. I don't even say thank you. And he doesn't bat an eye. He just goes back to eating the rest of his lunch, and he's talking about the Packer game with all my coworkers. And I love the Packers. I'm from Wisconsin. Like my whole life, I love the Packers. And I would love to go and be like, hey, yeah, that was a great game, or what about this? But I'm like, oh, I can't do that because I hate black people. That's right. So I just sit there by myself, like being a loser asshole the whole time I'm at work. And then the kicker of all this was it gets back to my mom that I'm wearing swastikas to work. And Jack is Jewish. And he's actually had family who perished in the Holocaust.
Ooh.
This gets back to my mom, and my mom is mortified and humiliated. And she calls Jack up and basically to tell him, like, I understand if you fire my son. Like, I'd fire him if I were you. I wouldn't put up with that. And rather than fire me, Jack goes, he's a good kid. He's just going through a phase. And not only did he let me keep my job, he hired my asshole skinhead buddies to sell the T-shirts that I was printing. So like the guys in my band, we all work there. Like they all sold the shirts I printed. And when we got done working for Jack, we'd all go into the basement and write songs about how Jews are taking all of our money to give to lazy black people who don't want to work. When in reality, like we all have a means to support ourselves thanks to the good graces of a Jewish man.
Uh-huh.
And our black coworkers actually feed us.
Yeah.
Like, so this hypocrisy had a weight to it. And the weight was like piled on by that kindness. And that kindness, I have to make this point, that kindness was power. A lot of our popular discourse nowadays, everybody's like power dynamics and this, your power, this, and domination, that. And what real power is to say to someone who's hostile and who hates you, to say, no, that's not how we're going to interact. Allow me to show you how a human being should treat another human being. That's power. That's literally dictating the rules of engagement. And that's what my coworkers did for me. That's what my supervisor did for me. That's what my boss did for me. And I'm ashamed that those acts of kindness didn't change me on the spot, because they didn't. That all happened like within year one of my 7-year involvement in white nationalism. But as we all should understand, the human psyche does not work in terms of subtraction. Like if we could just erase an experience that happened to us and go traipsing on with our lives, there would be no mental health industry. Like once something happens to us, it's part of who we are forever, good, bad, or ugly. And these acts of kindness literally planted seeds in my heart that, despite my best efforts to yank them out, they took hold and took root and grew to fruition and brought me to this point 7 years later. That's why I say, when the planets aligned, had I not experienced these acts of kindness, if one of these things were missing, that second death could have driven me further into it rather than being my cause for liberation.
Yeah, so powerful. Can you talk about the McDonald story?
The McDonald story. I love music and I love rock and roll, and I always say the McDonald story is like people with a lighter going, "Play Freebird!" Like,
because it's so sweet and I love it. I just love the interaction.
It is good. It's something I'll never forget, and it was really a formula thing. So early on, again, this is like month 3 or 4 into my whole skinhead journey, because I'm a gifted genius. If I didn't make that clear earlier, I figured that I'm on my own now. I'm living on my own and I'm calling my own shots. And I'm thinking, if I eat nothing but ramen noodles, and I'm not talking about like a good bowl of artisan ramen from like a legit ramen place. Like I'm talking about the 10 for $1 bricks of ramen noodles. If I'd eat nothing but ramen noodles, I'll have more beer money. That was my whole gifted genius plan. So I ate nothing but ramen noodles except on payday, when I would splurge and I'd go to McDonald's to get a Big Mac. Payday was on Wednesday. And right by the place where I cashed my check, I didn't have a bank account, was a McDonald's. And the first time I go in there to get my Big Mac, I'm kind of like frozen in the doorway, because behind the counter is this elderly Afro-American woman, and she has this beautiful smile on her face. Like, first of all, like, why is someone working at McDonald's this happy? Like, this is throwing me for a loop in the first place. And second of all, the smile was just like unconditional. It was like the sun. Like, the sun doesn't care who you are. It just shines on everybody. Doesn't matter what color your skin is, how much money you got, don't got, who you vote for, who you love, white power, skinhead, gangbanger. Like, the sun just shines for everyone. It's absolutely unconditional. And her smile had that same effect. And it stunned me, because I'm like, well, this is messing with my whole program. I'm trying to hate black people, and just looking at this sweet elderly woman with this smile, like, I cannot hate her. And this is bad. It's throwing me for a loop. I go in, I order my Big Mac, and she's just as nice as her smile would lead you to believe. She's just so pleasant, and like, really, even for interaction at McDonald's ordering a Big Mac, like, it's a pleasant experience because this woman is just so wonderful. And it's messing with me. So I get my food and I scurry out of there. A week goes by. I'm printing t-shirts, I'm drinking, I'm fighting, I'm making white power music. Payday again. I go back to the same McDonald's. She's there again. She remembers me. She remembers what I ordered. She's asking me she's talking about the weather. Now we're having more of an interaction. And this is like further messing me up. It's making my skin crawl, because it's messing with this ideology I'm trying to assume as my identity. It's thrown a wrench in the whole works of who I'm trying to be. I get my food, I get out of there. Another week passes. That Saturday in between the Sundays, I get the swastika tattooed on my middle finger. So the following Wednesday, when it's time for the Big Mac, I go right to McDonald's again. And again, after eating ramen noodles all week, I'm like, oh, it's Wednesday, it's Big Mac day. I can't wait. And I'm just thinking about the Big Mac. I'm not thinking about this woman. I get there again, and once again, I freeze in the doorway because I remember the tattoo I just got. And I had this like involuntary freezing where I'm like, I don't want her to see this tattoo. I specifically got this tattoo in the most offensive place I could put it so I could show it to people and like double down on the offense. Like, here's a swastika and fuck you. Like, that was the whole plan of it. But I didn't want to say that to her. It just like involuntarily. And so I'm thinking like, doesn't anybody else work here? And I'm sitting there for a minute. I'm trying to wait for someone else to come to the counter. Nobody does. And then I'm even thinking like, where's the next McDonald's? And it was December in Wisconsin and it was cold. And the next one was probably a good 20-minute walk. And I'm like, okay, well, I won't let her see the back of my hand, which would all be well and good. But if you're trying to get money out of your pocket without showing the back of your hand, it's kind of physically impossible. So as I'm getting out my money to pay for it, she sees the swastika and she looks at me, and it reminded me of my grandma talking to me when I was beating up my little brother. Like, I love you, but come on now. She just looked at me and she goes, what is that on your finger? And I was already 6'3" by then. I was about a foot taller than her. All I could do was like, I felt like I was 6 inches high when she asked me that. And I just looked down at my steel-toed skinhead boots and I couldn't look up at her. And I just said, it's nothing. And she waited until I looked up. And when our eyes met, she goes, I know that's not who you are. You're a better person than that. And I was just like, can I get my Big Mac, please? And I got my food and I scurried out of there. And then once again, like, I would love to tell you that I went skipping out of McDonald's going, racism, stupid, I'm cured.
Yeah.
But I just wolfed my food down, went back to the hovel where I lived. I got as drunk as I could, as fast as I could. And then I went out on the streets and like picked a fight with the first person I found. Because I wanted to put distance between me and this singularity of humanity I had just experienced from the grace of this woman at McDonald's. And again, it didn't change me on the spot. I did another 6.5 years of that miserable life, but all along that experience is with me. That kindness that woman showed me was with me. And that's a big part of my message today, is that there's no innocuous act of kindness. The most seemingly, inconsequential gesture can actually help to change the course of someone's life. And I think that act of kindness I experienced at McDonald's, thanks to the grace and wisdom and power of this elderly woman, was an essential ingredient in bringing me to the point to make a decision to leave when my second friend got killed rather than triple down and stay in.
Yeah. I think it also perfectly illustrates how when you have chosen something for yourself, when you've either been indoctrinated or you just double down on something that you believe is true, even if someone presents evidence, good chance you won't see it. It's a good chance you're going to ignore it. You're going to do the mental gymnastics to make it not be so, because
Right.
you've already made the decision, or someone has made the decision for you to be a certain way. But those little seeds, like you said, can grow into something later on. And so for those listening who maybe have someone who's in a situation similar to this, under someone else's power control or lost in their own identity, it's important not to give up and not to go at them with these accusations of, well, you're in a cult, and present anger, because they're just going to be defensive.
Right.
But if you can plant these little seeds, eventually they may be at a point in their life where they allow themselves to internalize it, where they allow themselves to see the facts or to see the truth that you've presented or the kindness you've presented. And it really is the best tool to get someone to a point of understanding and taking in the evidence that's in front of them, without making them more defensive. So I love that story for all those reasons. And we're just
Thank
about out
you.
of time. This has been so great, Arno. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us. I feel like we could talk for hours and hours, which is great.
I do need to mention what I'm doing nowadays at Parents for Peace.
Of course, that's what we're about to do next. Tell us what you're doing now. What brings you peace and happiness and all the things.
Sure. I work for an organization called Parents for Peace. People can find them at parentsforpeace.org with the number 4. We have a nationwide toll-free helpline, which is 844-49-PEACE. If you have a loved one who's become radicalized, you can call that number or visit the website, contact us through the website, and we will assign a team to your family to help coach your family to best create an environment that's most conducive to lead this person to a healthier way of life.
Wow.
My title there is I'm a peer exit specialist. So about half the cases we get involve white nationalism. The other half typically involve Islamism. My aforementioned colleague Mubin Sheikh is our Islamist peer support exit specialist. I handle the white nationalist cases. And when we're able to, we work with those individuals directly and talk to them. This is exactly what you just described, like plant those seeds to cultivate and lead them to understand that there's a better way to live their life. And that's my day job. I think your audience is a really great place to promote what we do at Parents for Peace. And I want everyone listening or watching to understand that there is help out there. We have some cases where individuals contact us directly and need help. And this is the same type of thing where if you're having a problem with drinking, you go to AA. If you have a problem with hate, you can go to Parents for Peace. It's the same type of process. We provide a support system and coaching and guidance to get people on a path to where they see their self-esteem and they can work with all the problems that I've worked with over my 54 years, only ideally on an accelerated path. It's really important to me to make sure everybody's aware of the resource of Parents for Peace. And I hope that anyone who has a loved one they're concerned about doesn't hesitate to reach out.
Wow, that is so incredible. What a great way to give back and to make amends, as you were talking about earlier, take accountability for your past and to make a difference. That's pretty incredible. It's amazing that you're able to do that.
Thanks, Elise. I really appreciate it. It's an honor for me to be able to do this work, and it could be incredibly difficult at times, but it's also incredibly rewarding. And like most things in life, it's the greatest things aren't easy. It takes dedication and some determination to make it happen.
Yeah, and a similar mission, Daryl Davis. I recorded with him. He is a Black man who sits down with members of the KKK and also plants the seeds to eventually lead them to giving up their robes and giving them to him, actually. I finished recording, and he's like, I was it. Or Arno's coming over in like 20 minutes. And I was like, what? I'm recording with him in a few days.
Okay, cool. I was just about to say, you know where I was Sunday night? I was at Daryl's house. We actually we recorded, I don't know if you heard the song Let's Work Together. There's been it was mainly publicized by Canned Heat. My favorite version is Dwight Yoakam, but it's together we stand, united we fall. Come on now, people. Let's all get on the ball. Let's work together.
Yeah.
Come on. Let's work together. Daryl and I recorded that. It's just an iPhone recording, but we're promoting it. And Daryl and I have done tons and tons of talks together. He's always wanted me to come sing with him. And I finally got over that hump, and now we're doing it. So anybody who wants to see a former neo-Nazi and a Afro-American rock and roll legend play together, like hit us up. We would love to come out.
Yeah, I thought it was such a funny, small world. And he told me to ask you, and now I'm going to forget the details. He's like, make sure to ask Arno about the security guard, was it?
About Harrison, Arkansas.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, I'll try to make this quick, but the first gig Daryl and I did together, and since then we've done about 40 or 50, it was in Harrison, Arkansas, organized by the Little Rock MLK Commission. And they brought about 300 kids from Little Rock, most of whom were Afro-American, to Harrison, where about 300 kids from there, most of whom were white, all came and were our audience for me and Daryl's talk. Leading up to the talk, a friend of mine from the Southern Poverty Law Center sent me an email. And he's like, "Hey, Arno, I hear you're doing that talk in Harrison." I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Do you know about Harrison?" And I'm like, "No." And he goes, "It's kind of ground zero for the Ku Klux Klan, like in this whole country. Like they run the town. They got billboards there. It's their place." And I was like, "Well, I'll tell them to come to the gig. Like they should come to the talk." And my friend's like, "Well, yeah, but I'm just saying, like, be careful when you're down there. Like, watch your back." And I'm like, "Okay." And I'm usually like not real security conscious. There's a fine line between fearless and foolhardy, and I've been like tiptoeing it my whole life. I don't know what side I'm on at any given time. But considering the warning I got from my buddy, I'm like, maybe I should be like security minded for this gig. So I sit down to compose an email to the organizer, and I CC Daryl on it. And in the email, I'm getting all in counterviolent extremism and counterterrorism, they call it red team, where you're like putting yourself in the shoes of the bad guys so you can like be a model for the good guys to work against. So I'm going full red team here. And I'm like, okay, Daryl and I are going to need adjoining hotel rooms on the top floor in the middle of the hotel. There need to be police at all the doorways. We need to be escorted from the hotel to the event. Blah 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 blah. I'm making this big long list of security measures that we need to take. And I CC Daryl and I fire it off. Daryl emails me right back and he goes, "Oh, that's awesome, Arno. Thanks for being on top of security." And he's like, "By the way, what time are you getting down here?" And I said, "I'm getting down at 3 p.m. And he's like, "Oh, that's too bad, because if you were here by noon, you could have lunch with me and Tom Robb, who's the leader of the Klan."
Oh, geez.
So all of my security measures, and Daryl's he's just sitting down having lunch with the guy. So
Oh, geez. That's one way to do it, huh?
That's Daryl. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, we didn't have any problems at all. And the gig was amazing. And it was the beginning of a really cool friendship between me and Daryl.
Yeah, that's one way to get to know somebody. You're like, "Oh, that's what you're about. Got it."
That's
Now I
how
understand.
Daryl rolls. Like
Yeah.
they love him. I don't know what to tell you. The Klan paid Daryl to come and speak at their annual conference.
Okay. Talk about mental gymnastics and
Right.
cognitive dissonance.
Right.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay. Well, great story. Glad I asked.
Yeah, I am too.
So to round this out, we need your Linda Listen moment, your sassy statement, like the
Linda
viral video, or
Listen.
something inspirational. Go ahead.
I love that you do that. There's a woman at my health club named Linda, and every time I see her, I think of that. Linda, listen. Linda, listen. Hate sucks. It's gonna put a hole in your life, and you don't have to live with it. There's better ways, and there's people to help you. And I'm one of your many options. So reach out to Parents for Peace, or reach out to someone else, and choose love over hate in your life, and you'll be glad you did every single day.
Perfect. Yes. And go check out Arno's books, Life After Hate. And what was your second one?
First one's called My Life After Hate.
My Life After Hate.
If you go to mylifeafterhate.com, you can see where to order the book, as well as my blog. I got a bunch of other stuff I wrote there. The other book is called The Gift of Our Wounds, and you can find that at giftofourwounds.com.
Great. And where can people find you on social media?
Social media, I do LinkedIn and I do Instagram. I'm just Arno Michaelis on both of them, and I'd love to connect with anybody who's interested.
Great. Any other final thoughts before we go, Arno?
I just want to thank you, Shalise. This has been a really awesome conversation, and excuse me, I've been doing this for 15 years, and it's always a challenge to like keep it fresh and interesting and to be like excited about it. And you did a really amazing job at helping me do that today. So thank you, and thank everybody who listens.
Thank you. I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
know it can get redundant telling your story because I've done it on many podcasts. And
There you go.
like, how do I tell the same story over and over? I had to make you tell the McDonald story, though. Sorry.
That's
But
okay. I enjoyed telling it, for sure.
okay, good. Yeah, so glad to hear that. Happy to have you on. And yeah, guys, if you're listening, leave those words of encouragement down below. We love to hear your thoughts. Our guests love the support. We have such an amazing community who leaves the best comments. I'm really grateful for you guys. And it's the best way to support the podcast. As I mentioned before, it's free. Liking, subscribing, all of that helps boost the algorithm so more people can see this and become aware of these toxic groups. And if you want to support further, we do have a Patreon at patreon.com/cults-to-consciousness. Our latest patrons, Imagine, Peace, and Margaret, thank you so much for joining us. We also just added a yearly option where you can get the whole year in advance, and it really helps us support us. And we have merch at cults-to-consciousness.com. We have a clips channel as well if you want to check out shorter content from our previous longer form interviews. If you like this video, I'll link 2 more down here below. We have an amazing layout from former white supremacist and Daryl Davis, as we mentioned, so check those out. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.